Jake Morrison sat in the back corner of the classroom, trying to make himself invisible. The other students filled the room with their strange colors and shapes. Some had blue skin that sparkled like diamonds. Others had 4 arms or 3 eyes. A few were so tall they had to bend their heads to fit under the ceiling. All of them were smarter than Jake. At least, that's what they told him every day. "Look at the human," whispered Kex, one of the crystal-skinned twins from Zephyr Prime. His voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "He's taking notes with an actual pen. How primitive." His sister Vex giggled, a sound like breaking glass. "My little brother could solve those math problems faster, and he's only 50 years old." Jake kept writing, pretending not to hear them. The math problems were actually quite hard, but he had figured most of them out. He just worked slower than the others. That's what happened when you were the only human in a school full of aliens who had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. Thyra, the tall gray alien with 4 arms, turned around in her seat. Her 3 eyes looked at Jake with what might have been pity. "Jake," she said, her voice echoing in his mind without her lips moving. "You know you don't have to be here, right? There are special schools for developing species." "I'm fine here," Jake said quietly. He had been saying the same thing for 2 years now. "Are you, though?" asked Dex, the golden-skinned Centaurian who sat near the front. He was the class leader and the strongest student. "You barely passed last semester. Maybe you should consider switching to something easier." Professor Quilnix entered the room, floating on 6 tentacles. His purple skin changed colors as he moved, showing his mood. Right now, he was a calm blue-green. "Good morning, class. Today, we begin our final project for the semester." The students perked up. Final projects at the Galactic Academy were always interesting. "Each of you will guide the class on a field trip to your home world," the professor continued. "You will teach us about your planet's ecosystem, wildlife, and environment. We will spend 3 days on each world, studying and learning." Jake's stomach dropped. He had been dreading this day since the beginning of the year. How exciting! Thyra's mental voice filled everyone's head. "We can finally see the famous Earth Death World." The other students started talking at once. Jake heard words like dangerous, primitive, and barbaric floating around the room. "I heard their planet has weather that can kill you," said Mora, the blue-skinned aquatic alien from Neptune's moons. "And the air is full of poison gases. The gravity is so strong it crushes most species," added Vex. "How do humans even move? Around? They probably don't," Kex laughed. "That's why they're so weak and slow." Professor Quilnix changed to a warning orange color. "That's enough. Every world has its challenges. Earth has produced a species capable of space travel, so it cannot be as primitive as you think." But Jake could see the doubt in the professor's color-changing skin. Even the teacher wasn't sure about taking advanced alien students to Earth. "When? Do we go to Earth?" asked Dex, flexing his 4 arms. "I want to see how well I can handle this death world." "Earth will be our first stop," said the professor. "We leave in 3 days." The class erupted in excited chatter. Jake heard his classmates making bets about how long they would survive on his home planet. Most thought it would be easy. After all, if weak humans could live there, surely superior alien species would have no problems. "Jake," Thyra's voice whispered in his mind, "you should warn us about the dangers. We don't want anyone to get hurt." Jake looked up at his classmates. They were all so confident, so sure of themselves. They had never failed at anything. They had never been told they were too weak or too stupid. They lived on perfect worlds with perfect weather and perfect everything. "You should be careful," Jake said out loud. "Earth is not like your worlds." "Oh, we know," Vex said with a crystal. "Laugh. It's a death world. We've read about it. Terrible storms, dangerous animals, poison air. But we have environmental suits and advanced technology. We'll be fine. Yeah, agreed Dex. If primitive humans can survive there, we can definitely handle it. Jake tried again. Maybe we should visit one of your worlds first. Let me learn how to handle different environments before you come to mine. Don't be silly, Thyra said, her mental voice warm but condescending. You're just nervous because you know how dangerous your world is. But we're not fragile humans. We can handle anything Earth throws at us. The other students nodded in agreement. They had decided that Earth would be their easiest field trip. A chance to see how the weakest species in the galaxy managed to survive on such a hostile world. Jake sank back into his chair. He had tried to warn them, but they wouldn't listen. They thought he was just being modest or scared. They couldn't understand that his warnings came from real concern, not false modesty. As the class continued, Jake found himself thinking about home. He missed the smell of pine trees and the sound of rain on his bedroom window. He missed hiking in the mountains and swimming in cold lakes. He missed feeling comfortable in his own skin. But now his classmates would see all of that. They would see Earth through their alien eyes and judge it as primitive and dangerous. They would see his home and think less of him for coming from such a place. The bell rang, and students began filing out of the classroom. Jake packed his simple notebooks and pens while his classmates stored their advanced devices. Don't worry, Jake, Thyra said as she passed his desk. We'll be very respectful when we visit your world. We know it's not your fault that humans evolved on such a difficult planet. Jake nodded and smiled, but inside he felt a mix of sadness and something else. Something that might have been anticipation. His classmates were so sure they knew what Earth was like. They had read about it in their textbooks and decided it was a dangerous but simple world. They had no idea what they were really walking into. As Jake walked to his next class, he couldn't shake the feeling that this field trip would change everything. His classmates thought they were prepared for Earth because they had technology and superior evolution on their side. But Jake knew something they didn't. Earth wasn't just dangerous because of its weather or animals. It was dangerous because it had shaped every human who had ever lived there. And soon, his classmates would learn exactly what that meant. The transport ship settled onto the landing pad with a soft hum. Jake looked out the window at the familiar sight of the Colorado mountains. Snow still capped the highest peaks, and the air looked crisp and clean. Spring was just beginning, which meant the weather would be mild and pleasant. This is it, Jake said to his classmates. Welcome to Earth. The other students pressed against the windows, their various alien features showing excitement and curiosity. The ship's sensors were already taking readings of the outside environment. Atmospheric composition confirmed, announced the ship's computer. Oxygen at 21%. Nitrogen at 78%. Trace gases detected. Gravity at standard Earth normal. See? Said Dex, stretching his 4 golden arms. The readings are exactly what we expected. Nothing we can't handle. Jake put on his simple hiking boots and grabbed a light jacket. The temperature is about 50 degrees. It might rain later. His classmates were already suiting up in their environmental gear. Thyra's suit covered her gray skin completely, with special padding for her 4 arms. Kex and Vex wore matching crystal blue suits that would protect their delicate skin from Earth's harsh sunlight. Mora's suit had extra water recycling systems to keep her gills moist. Are you sure you don't want a suit? Asked Professor Quilnix, his skin showing concerned yellow patches. The readings showed dangerous levels of solar radiation. I'll be fine, Jake said. This is normal for humans. The airlock opened with a hiss. Jake stepped out first, breathing deeply of the mountain air. It smelled like pine trees and snow melt, and something else he couldn't name but had missed terribly. He felt his muscles relax as Earth's familiar gravity settled around him. His classmates followed more slowly, their environmental suits making soft beeping sounds as they adjusted to the new environment. "The air feels heavy," Vex said, her voice muffled by her suit's speaker. "How do you breathe this thick stuff?" "The gravity is crushing," Dex added. He was carrying the expedition's equipment pack, which should have been easy for someone with his strength. But after just a few steps, he was already breathing hard. Jake looked at his friend with concern. "Do you want me to carry some of that?" "No," Dex said firmly. "I can handle it. I just need to adjust to the different atmosphere." But Jake could see that Dex was struggling. The Centaurian's world had much lighter gravity and richer air. What felt normal to Jake was like trying to breathe soup for Dex. Thyra suddenly stumbled, her forearms flailing as she caught herself against a tree. "What is that noise?" she gasped. "What noise?" Jake asked. "All of it. Everything is screaming in my head. Make it stop." Jake looked around at the peaceful forest. Birds were singing in the trees. Insects buzzed in the grass. A squirrel chattered somewhere nearby. To him, it was the quiet, normal sound of nature. But then he remembered that Thyra was telepathic. On her world, there were very few animals, and most of them had quiet minds. Here on Earth, every living thing was broadcasting its thoughts and feelings. The sheer volume of mental activity was overwhelming her. "Try to focus on just one mind at a time," Jake suggested. "Don't try to hear everything at once." Thyra shook her head frantically. "There are too many. They're all talking at once." "How do you stand it?" "I can't hear them," Jake explained. "Humans aren't telepathic." "Lucky you," Thyra muttered, pressing her hands against her suited head. They had been outside for less than 10 minutes, and already his classmates were having problems. Jake felt a growing sense of worry, but also something else. For the first time in years, he was in an environment where he was comfortable and his friends were not. "Let's set up base camp," suggested Professor Quilnex. "We can adjust to the environment gradually." The class began unpacking their advanced equipment. Jake watched as they struggled with devices that should have been simple to operate. Earth's magnetic field was interfering with their sensors. The atmospheric pressure was throwing off their calibrations. Even their communication devices were having trouble with Earth's electrical activity. "This is impossible," Keck said, his crystal skin flickering with frustration. "The electromagnetic readings are all wrong." "Maybe your equipment isn't designed for this type of environment," Jake suggested. "Our equipment works on hundreds of worlds," Vex replied sharply. "The problem is with this planet. Everything here is unstable." Jake looked up at the clear blue sky. A few white clouds drifted peacefully overhead. The sun was warm on his face, and a gentle breeze rustled the trees. To him, it was a perfect day. "Should we start collecting samples?" he asked. "First, we need to set up our shelter," said Mora. Her aquatic features were already showing stress from the dry mountain air. "I need to get to a more humid environment." The class spent the next hour trying to assemble their high-tech shelter. It was supposed to be an advanced habitat pod that could adapt to any environment. But Earth's variable weather patterns kept confusing its systems. The wind would change direction, and the shelter would recalibrate. A cloud would pass over the sun, and the temperature sensors would reset everything. Jake watched his classmates grow more and more frustrated. Finally, he spoke up. "Maybe I could help?" "How?" asked Dex, who was now sweating heavily inside his environmental suit. "I could set up a simple camp while you work on your equipment, just as a backup." The others looked at each other. They clearly didn't want to admit that they needed help from the weakest member of their class. But their advanced technology wasn't working, and Jake's offer was the only alternative. "Fine," said Professor Quilmix. "But be careful. We don't want you getting hurt." Jake almost laughed. He was the only one who wasn't in danger. while his classmates struggled with their failing equipment. He quickly set up a basic camp using materials from Earth. He found dry wood and built a fire pit. He strung up a tarp between trees to provide shelter from rain. He even found a small stream where they could get fresh water. "How did you do that so fast?" asked Thyra, who was still struggling with mental noise from the forest animals. "I learned camping when I was young," Jake said. "Most human children know how to do this." "Children?" Vex's voice was shocked. "You teach survival skills to children?" "We have to," Jake explained. "Earth can be dangerous if you don't know how to handle it." As if to prove his point, the sky began to darken. Jake looked up at the gathering clouds and felt the change in air pressure that meant rain was coming. "Storm approaching," he said. "We should get under cover." His classmates looked at their weather instruments, which were showing conflicting readings. Their technology couldn't predict Earth's rapidly changing weather patterns. "The equipment says clear skies for the next 6 hours," said Dex. "Your equipment is wrong," Jake said. "It's going to rain in about 20 minutes. "How can you possibly know that?" asked Mora. Jake pointed to the clouds, the way the wind was shifting, the way the birds were behaving. "You learned to read the signs." His classmates stared at him in disbelief. They had advanced instruments and computers, but Jake was predicting weather by looking at clouds and feeling the wind. It seemed impossible. 20 minutes later, the rain began to fall. Jake's classmates hurried under the simple tarp, shelter he had built while their advanced habitat pod continued to malfunction in the changing weather. "This is only the first day," Jake said quietly as he watched his friends shiver in their environmental suits. "Are you sure you want to stay for 3 days?" "We're not giving up," Dex said firmly, though his voice was strained. "We came here to study your world, and that's what we're going to do." Jake nodded, but he could see that his classmates were already struggling with challenges they hadn't expected. They had thought Earth would be dangerous because of its wildlife and weather. They hadn't realized that the real danger was in not understanding how to live with those things as the rain drummed on the tarp above them. Jake wondered what the next 2 days would bring. His classmates were stubborn and proud. They wouldn't admit defeat easily. But Earth had a way of teaching hard lessons to those who underestimated it. The storm was just beginning. The second day started badly and got worse. Jake woke up comfortable in his sleeping bag, feeling rested and ready for the day. His classmates emerged from their environmental suits, looking exhausted and miserable. "I didn't sleep at all," Thyra complained, her mental voice filled with fatigue. "The noise from all these animals never stops. Even at night, there are creatures thinking and dreaming and living. How do humans sleep with all this mental activity?" "We can't hear it," Jake reminded her gently. "But even if we could, we'd learn to ignore it. That's what adaptation means." Mora was in even worse shape. Despite drinking twice as much water as usual, her blue skin was starting to look dry and flaky. Her gills were working overtime, trying to extract moisture from the thin mountain air. "I need to get to a more humid environment," she said, her voice raspy. "This dry air is killing me." "The nearest lake is about 2 miles away," Jake offered. "We could hike there if you want." 2 miles? Dex looked horrified. "In this gravity? Carrying all our equipment?" Jake looked at his friend with growing concern. Dex was supposed to be the strongest member of their class, but Earth's gravity and thin air were wearing him down. His golden skin had lost its healthy glow, and his forearms trembled slightly from the effort of just standing up. "I could carry most of the equipment," Jake suggested. "I'm used to hiking in these conditions." "No," Dex said firmly. "I can handle it. I just need time to adjust." But Jake could see that Dex was struggling more than he wanted to admit. The Centaurian's world had light gravity and rich, thick air. Here on Earth, every movement was harder, every breath was work. Professor Quilnix tried to start the days. Research, but their equipment was failing even worse than before. The instruments that had worked perfectly on dozens of other worlds couldn't handle Earth's chaotic electromagnetic field and constantly changing atmospheric conditions. The scanner keeps resetting, Keck said, his crystal skin flickering with frustration. Every time a cloud passes overhead, it changes the readings. Maybe the equipment isn't broken, Jake suggested. Maybe Earth is just different from the worlds you're used to. Different how? Asked Vex, her voice sharp. More active. More alive. Your worlds are stable and predictable. Earth is always changing. The weather shifts, the magnetic field fluctuates, the seasons change everything. Life here has to adapt constantly. His classmates stared at him. They had come from worlds where conditions stayed the same for thousands of years. The idea of an environment that changed daily was almost impossible for them to understand. How? Do you build a civilization on a world that never stays the same? Asked Thyra. You learn to change with it, Jake said. You become flexible. You prepare for different conditions. You expect the unexpected. That sounds exhausting, Mora said. Weakly. It is, Jake agreed. But it also makes you stronger. Despite their equipment problems, the class decided to continue with their research mission. They needed to collect samples and document Earth's ecosystem. Jake led them through the forest, pointing out plants and animals that his classmates found fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. Those flowers are beautiful, Vex said, pointing to a patch of wildflowers. Are they dangerous? No, they're just flowers, Jake said. But watch out for the thorns on those bushes. Everything here is either beautiful or dangerous, Kex observed. Sometimes both. That's how evolution works on Earth, Jake explained. Beauty attracts. Danger protects. Sometimes the same thing does both. They were collecting samples near a stream when they heard the rustling in the bushes. Jake looked up to see a large black bear emerge from the trees, followed by 2 cubs. The bear was just looking for water, but to his classmates, it looked like a monster. Hostile creature detected, announced Dex's suit scanner. Recommend immediate evacuation. Wait, Jake said calmly. Don't run. Don't make sudden movements. Just back away slowly. Are you insane? Thyra's mental voice was filled with panic. That thing is huge. It could kill us all. Only if we threaten it or its cubs, Jake said. Just stay calm and give it space. But his classmates were already panicking. Their environmental suits were beeping warnings about the approaching danger. Mora was trying to run, but her suit's heavy water recycling systems made her clumsy. Dex was reaching for some kind of energy weapon. Don't, Jake said firmly. That will only make it angry. The bear looked at the group of strange, noisy aliens and made a decision. It stood up on its hind legs to get a better look, which made Jake's classmates scream in terror. It's attacking, Vex shouted. No, it's just curious, Jake said. Stay calm. Let me handle this. Jake moved slowly between the bear and his classmates. He spoke in a low, calm voice, not to the bear, but to his friends. Just breathe. Don't. Look directly at it. Back away slowly. Give it room to leave. The bear watched Jake for a moment, then dropped back to all fours. It sniffed the air, decided these strange creatures weren't worth the trouble, and wandered off with its cubs. Classmates stood frozen in terror long after the bear had disappeared. How did you do that? Thyra asked, her mental voice shaking. I understood what it wanted, Jake said. It was just protecting its cubs and looking for water. We weren't threatening it, so it left us alone. You could have been killed, Mora sighed. Not really, Jake replied. Bears usually avoid humans unless they're surprised or cornered. I've seen them before. You've seen them before? Dex was amazed. You mean there are more of those things? Bears are pretty common in these mountains, Jake said, along with mountain lions, wolves, coyotes, and other animals. But they're not usually dangerous if you know how to behave around them. His classmates stared at him in disbelief. They were beginning to realize that Jake had been living his entire life surrounded by creatures that could kill him. And somehow, he had learned to coexist with them. That night, their shelter systems failed completely. The constant temperature, changes, and electromagnetic interference had finally overwhelmed their technology. Jake helped them set up a proper camp using basic materials, but his classmates were miserable. "I can't take much more of this," Mora said. Her skin was now seriously dehydrated, and her gills were struggling in the dry air. "Maybe we should call for emergency pickup," suggested Vex. "No," said Dex firmly. "We came here to study this world, and that's what we're going to do. We can't let one dangerous planet defeat us." But Jake could see that his friends were reaching their limits. The constant stress of living in an environment that their bodies and minds weren't designed for was wearing them down. They were discovering that surviving on Earth required skills that couldn't be learned from textbooks or compensated for with technology. As they sat around the fire Jake had built, listening to the sounds of the forest at night, his classmates began to understand something important. Every howl, every rustle, every strange sound represented a life form that had learned to survive in this chaotic, dangerous, beautiful world. And somehow, humans had not only survived here, but thrived. They had built cities and civilizations, while sharing their world with bears and wolves and storms and earthquakes. They had learned to read weather patterns and animal behavior, and 1,000 other skills that alien technology couldn't replicate. "Jake," Thyra said quietly, her mental voice thoughtful, "what you did today with the bear, is that something all humans can do?" "Most humans who grow up around wildlife learn those skills," Jake said. "You have to, if you want to survive." Survive. Dex repeated the word slowly. "We keep using that word. But on our worlds, survival isn't something you think about. Food is provided. Weather is controlled. Dangerous animals don't exist." "That sounds nice," Jake said. "But it also sounds kind of boring." His classmates considered this. They were beginning to realize that their perfect, safe worlds had perhaps made them soft. They had never needed to develop the skills that Jake took for granted. They had never needed to be strong or adaptable or resourceful. "One more day," Professor Quilnick said, his skin showing determined purple patches. "We have one more day to complete our research." Jake nodded, but he wondered if his classmates would make it through another day. Earth was teaching them lessons about survival that their advanced civilization had never prepared them for. And the hardest lessons were still to come. The third day began with disaster. Jake woke up to the sound of rain, drumming harder than before. But this wasn't the gentle shower from yesterday. This was a serious storm, and the weather was turning dangerous. He checked his watch and felt his stomach drop. The barometric pressure had been falling all night, and the wind was picking up speed. All the signs pointed to flash flooding, which could be deadly in these narrow mountain valleys. "Everyone up," Jake said urgently. "We need to move to higher ground right now." His classmates stirred slowly in their environmental suits. After 2 days of struggle, they were exhausted and moving even slower than usual. "What's the emergency?" asked Professor Quilnix, his skin showing confused gray patches. "Flash flood warning," Jake said, already packing the essential supplies. "This valley is going to fill with water in the next hour or two." "That's impossible," Dex said, checking his weather instruments. "The scanners show only moderate precipitation. Nothing dangerous." "Your scanners are wrong," Jake said firmly. "Look at the water level in the stream. Look at how fast the clouds are moving. Feel how the air pressure has changed." His classmates looked at their instruments instead of the environment around them. Their technology was telling them the conditions were safe, so they believed it over Jake's warnings. "I think you're overreacting," Thyra said, her mental voice tired. "We've been through worse already." "No, we haven't," Jake said. "This is different. This is actually dangerous." But his friends were too exhausted to listen. They had been struggling with Earth's challenges for 2 days, and now they just wanted to rest. The idea of packing up camp and hiking to higher ground seemed impossible. "We'll stay put," decided Professor Quilnix. "Our emergency shelter can handle any weather." Jake looked at the shelter, which had been malfunctioning since they arrived. Then he looked at the rising water in the stream and the dark clouds gathering overhead. "Fine," he said, "but I'm moving our supplies to higher ground, just in case." While his classmates tried to make their failing equipment work, Jake quietly moved their food, water, and emergency gear to a rocky outcrop about a quarter-mile away. It was hard work, but his body was adapted to this kind of physical effort. His classmates couldn't have made the climb, even if they had wanted to dot an hour later. The storm hit with full force. The rain came down in sheets, and the wind howled through the trees. Jake's classmates huddled in their shelter, which was shaking and groaning under the assault. "The structure is failing," announced the shelter's computer. "Recommend immediate evacuation. Where are we supposed to go?" asked Vex. Her crystal skin flickering with fear. Jake appeared in the doorway, soaked but calm. "Follow me." "I know a safe place." "In this storm?" Mora asked. "We'll be killed." "You'll be killed if you stay here," Jake replied. "The water is already rising. We have maybe 10 minutes before this whole area floods." His classmates looked out at the raging storm, and then at their failing shelter. They had no choice but to trust Jake. One by one, they followed him into the storm. Jake led them through the chaos, somehow finding safe footing on slippery rocks and avoiding the worst of the wind. His classmates stumbled and fell, but Jake was always there to help them up. Dex, weighted down by his environmental suit, slipped on a wet rock and nearly fell into the rushing water. Jake caught him with one arm and pulled him to safety. "How are you so strong?" Dex gasped. "I'm not strong," Jake said. "I'm just used to this." They reached the rocky outcrop just as the valley below began to fill with water. Their campsite disappeared under a rushing torrent that would have swept them all away. Jake's classmates watched in horror as the place they had been sleeping was consumed by the flood. "You saved our lives," Thyra said, her mental voice filled with awe and gratitude. "I just listened to what the environment was telling me," Jake said. "Earth talks to you if you know how to listen." They spent the rest of the day huddled together in the emergency shelter Jake had built. As the storm raged outside, Jake began to tell them stories about Earth and humanity that they had never heard before. "Your textbooks make it sound like Earth is just a dangerous world where primitive humans somehow survived," Jake said. "But that's not the whole story." "What do you mean?" asked Kex. "Earth didn't just happen to produce humans," Jake explained. "Earth made humans. Every challenge, every danger, every change in climate or environment pushed our ancestors to become better at surviving." He told them about the ice ages that had forced humans to develop better tools and cooperation. He explained how volcanic eruptions and earthquakes had taught humans to build flexible societies that could adapt to disaster. He described how droughts and floods had made humans learn to plan for the future and work together. "Every skill you think is primitive actually represents thousands of years of evolution," Jake said. "Fire making, tool crafting, weather prediction, animal behavior, plant identification. These aren't simple skills. They're incredibly complex knowledge that kept our species alive." His classmates listened in fascination. They had always thought of human abilities as basic compared to their own advanced technology. But now they were beginning to understand that human knowledge was specialized in ways their technology couldn't replicate. When you predicted the storm, Vex said slowly, you were using skills that your ancestors developed over thousands of years. Exactly, Jake said. And when I understood what the bear wanted, I was using knowledge that humans have been building since we first shared the world with dangerous animals. But how did you learn all this? Asked Thyra. You're just a student like us. Every human child learns these things, Jake said. We have to. Earth doesn't give you a choice. You adapt or you die. Dex was quiet for a long moment. On my world, children don't learn survival skills. They don't need to. Everything is safe and provided for them. That sounds wonderful, Jake said. But it also means you never develop the skills that Earth requires. Is that why we're struggling so much? Asked Mora. Because we've never had to adapt to real challenges? Partly, Jake agreed. But also because each of your worlds is stable and predictable. You evolved to handle specific conditions. Humans evolved to handle change itself. As the storm continued outside, Jake's classmates began to see their human friend in a completely different light. They had thought he was the weakest member of their group because he lacked their specialized abilities. But now they realized that his human traits were actually advantages in this environment. You're not weaker than us, Thyra said suddenly. You're just different, adapted for different challenges. All this time, we've been measuring you by our standards, Dex added. But maybe we should have been measuring ourselves by yours. Jake smiled. You're not weak either. You're just out of your element. Your abilities are incredible on your own worlds. But Earth is my world. This is where I belong. When the storm finally passed, Jake's classmates saw the forest with new eyes. Instead of a chaotic, dangerous environment, they began to see it as a complex system where every element had its place. The storm that had nearly killed them had also watered the plants and filled the streams. The bear that had frightened them was just another creature trying to survive and raise its young. I want to learn, Thyra said. Teach me how to read the signs like you do. Show me how to build a fire without technology, asked Kex. Help me understand how humans became so adaptable. Requested Vex. Jake spent the rest of the day teaching his classmates basic survival skills. They were clumsy at first, but they were eager to learn. For the first time since arriving on Earth, they were working with the environment instead of fighting against it. As the sun set on their final day, Jake's classmates gathered around the fire he had taught them to build. They were tired, dirty, and humbled by their experience. But they were also excited by what they had learned. We need to completely rewrite our presentation, Professor Quilnick said, his skin showing thoughtful blue patterns. Everything we thought we knew about Earth and humans was wrong. Not wrong, Jake said, just incomplete. You saw the challenges, but you missed the solutions. You saw the dangers, but you missed the adaptations. Tomorrow we go back to the academy, Dex said. But I don't think any of us will ever be the same. Jake looked at his friends, who were no longer the confident, superior aliens who had mocked him just 3 days ago. They were still the same people, but now they understood something important about strength and survival, and what it really meant to be human. Thank you, Thyra said, her mental voice warm with genuine respect, for saving us, for teaching us, for showing us what we were too blind to see. Jake nodded, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since leaving Earth, he felt proud of who he was and where he came from. You don't need to thank me, he said. You would have done the same for me on your worlds. Maybe, said Dex. But we wouldn't have known how. That's the difference. As they prepared for sleep on their final night, Jake's classmates talked quietly, among themselves. They were processing everything they had learned, not just about Earth, but about themselves and their assumptions. I keep thinking about what Jake said, Vex whispered to her brother, about humans being adapted for change. Itself, What if that's not a weakness? What if that's the most valuable trait in the galaxy? I've been thinking the same thing, Kex replied. We're all specialists. We're perfect for our own worlds, but helpless anywhere else. But humans can adapt to anything. Mora was examining her hands in the firelight. 3 days ago, I thought, Jake was the most primitive being I'd ever met. Now I realize he might be the most advanced. He can survive anywhere, learn anything, adapt to any situation. And he's not even exceptional for a human, Thyra added. He said all human children learn these skills. Imagine what their best explorers and scientists must be capable of. Professor Quillix listened to his students with growing amazement. In 3 days, their entire worldview had been transformed. They had come to Earth expecting to study a primitive species on a dangerous world. Instead, they had discovered that the supposed primitives were actually the most adaptable beings. In known space. Class, he said softly, I think we need to reconsider everything we thought we knew about species development and civilization. What do you mean? Asked Dex. We've always assumed that the most advanced species are those who have gained the most control over their environment, the professor explained. But what if true advancement means learning to work with any environment? What if adaptability is more valuable than specialization? The students were quiet, contemplating this revolutionary idea. Everything they had been taught about evolution and civilization was being challenged by what they had experienced on Earth. Jake, Thyra said, can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you explain what we would face here? Jake was quiet for a moment. I tried, he said finally. But you wouldn't have believed me. You had to experience it for yourselves. But you knew we would struggle. I knew it would be hard for you, Jake admitted. But I also knew you were smart and capable. I thought you would figure it out. We almost didn't, Mora said. Without you, we might have died. But you didn't, Jake pointed out. You adapted. You learned. You survived. That's what intelligent beings do when they face challenges. Is that how you see us? Asked Vex. As intelligent beings who can adapt? I've always seen you that way, Jake said. You're all brilliant in your own fields. You just needed to learn new skills for a new environment. His classmates stared at him in amazement. Even after days of mockery and dismissal, even after they had called him primitive and weak, Jake still believed in their potential. He had never stopped seeing them as equals, even when they couldn't see him the same way. You're a better person than we are, Dex said quietly. No, Jake replied. I'm just used to being underestimated. It taught me to look for the best in others, instead of the worst. Another adaptation, Thyra observed. Humans learn to work together because survival required cooperation. Everything comes back to survival, Jake agreed. But survival isn't just about not dying. It's about thriving, growing, becoming better. That's what Earth taught us. As the fire burned low, Jake's classmates settled in for their final night on Earth. Tomorrow, they would return to the academy, but they would never be the same. They had learned that strength comes in many forms, that intelligence can be practical as well as theoretical, and that the quiet human in the back of their class was actually one of the most capable beings they had ever met. Jake, Professor, Quillix said as the others fell asleep. I owe you an apology. I should have recognized your abilities sooner. You weren't taught to recognize them, Jake said. Your education focused on advanced technology and theoretical knowledge. You couldn't have known that practical skills were just as valuable. Will you help us learn? The professor asked. When we return to the academy, will you teach us what you've taught them? Jake smiled. I'd be honored to. As he lay down to sleep, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt valued, respected, and appreciated for who he was. His classmates had finally seen past their preconceptions to recognize the truth about humans and Earth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time since leaving home, Jake felt ready to face them. He was no longer the weak outsider, trying to prove himself. He was a human, with all the strength and adaptability that implied, and his classmates would never forget what that meant. The transport ship lifted off from Earth's surface, carrying Jake and his classmates back to the Galactic Academy. But the beings who boarded the ship were very different from the ones who had left just 4 days earlier. Jake sat quietly in his seat, watching the mountains disappear below them. He was leaving home again, but this time he didn't feel like he was running away. He was returning to school with friends who finally understood what it meant to be human. His classmates were unusually quiet during the journey. They spent most of the time reviewing their notes and recordings, trying to process everything they had experienced. But Jake could see that they were looking at their data with completely new eyes. "Look at this," Vex said, showing her brother. A recording of Jake building the fire. "Watch how he selects the wood. He's not just grabbing random sticks. He's choosing specific sizes and types of wood for different purposes. And see how he arranges them?" Kex added. "The structure is perfectly designed for airflow and heat distribution. This isn't primitive technology. This is elegant engineering." Thyra was reviewing her notes about human survival skills. "I counted over 50 different abilities that Jake demonstrated in just 3 days. Weather prediction, animal behavior, plant identification, fire making, shelter construction, water purification, emergency medicine, navigation, and dozens more. Any one of those skills would be considered advanced on most worlds," Dex said. "But Jake treats them as basic knowledge that every human child should learn." Professor Quilnix was working on their presentation for the Academy. "We need to completely change our approach," he said. "We can't present this as a study of a primitive species on a dangerous world. We need to present it as a study of the most adaptable species in known space. Will the Academy accept that?" asked Mora. "Everything we've been taught says that specialization is the key to advancement." "Maybe everything we've been taught is wrong," the professor replied, "or at least incomplete. Specialization works when conditions are stable. But when conditions change, you need adaptability. Like now," Thyra said suddenly. "The galaxy is changing. New worlds are being discovered. New challenges are emerging. Maybe we need humans to help us adapt to these changes." Jake looked up from his own notes. "You don't need humans," he said. "You need human-style thinking. The ability to adapt, to learn, to find solutions instead of just applying known answers." "Can you teach us that?" asked Dex. "I think you've already started learning it," Jake replied. "You adapted to Earth's challenges. You learned to work with the environment instead of trying to control it. You found ways to survive when your technology failed." "But it was so hard," Vex said. "How do humans make it look so easy?" "We've had thousands of years of practice," Jake explained. "And it's not easy for us either. We just make it look easy, because we've learned to hide our struggles." "Why?" asked Thyra. "Because showing weakness can be dangerous," Jake said. "On Earth, predators attack the weak. So humans learn to appear strong, even when they're struggling." "Is that why you never complained?" Mora asked. "Even when we were treating you badly?" Jake nodded. Complaining wouldn't have helped. It would have just confirmed what you already believed about human weakness. "But you weren't weak," Dex said. "You were the strongest one among us." "I was adapted to different challenges," Jake corrected. "Just like you're adapted to your world's challenges." When they arrived at the Academy, word of their Earth expedition had already spread. Students and faculty gathered to hear about their experiences on the famous human death world. Everyone expected to hear stories of barely surviving in a hostile environment. Instead, they heard something completely different. Earth is not a death world, Professor Quillis announced to the packed auditorium. It's a life world. A world so full of life, so rich in diversity, that it created the most adaptable species we have ever encountered. The audience murmured in surprise. This was not what they had expected to hear. Thyra stepped forward. For 3 days, we observed Jake Morrison in his natural environment. What we saw was not a primitive human struggling to survive. What we saw was a being so perfectly adapted to change that he could handle any situation. Jake predicted weather, patterns that our instruments couldn't detect, Vex added. He understood animal behavior that our scanners couldn't analyze. He built shelter that worked better than our advanced technology. But most importantly, Vex said, he saved our lives. Multiple times, with skills that we had dismissed as primitive. The audience was stunned. They had expected to hear about human weakness and Earth's dangers. Instead, they were hearing about human strength and Earth's wonders. Are you saying that humans are more advanced than we thought? Asked a student in the audience. We're saying that advancement isn't what we thought it was, Kex replied. We've been measuring advancement by technological sophistication. But maybe we should be measuring it by adaptability and resilience. Humans don't just survive on Earth, Mora explained. They thrive there. They've built cities while sharing their world with predators. They've developed art and science while dealing with natural disasters. They've created civilization and harmony with chaos. The presentation continued for over an hour. Jake's classmates showed recordings of his abilities, explained the complexity of his knowledge, and demonstrated how human skills could complement alien technology. The question isn't whether humans are primitive, Professor Quilix concluded. The question is whether we're advanced enough to learn from them. The audience erupted in discussion. Some were skeptical, but many were intrigued. The idea that humans might have valuable skills to teach other species was revolutionary. After the presentation, Jake found himself surrounded by students and faculty who wanted to learn more. For the first time in his academic career, he was the center of attention for positive reasons. Would you be willing to teach a course on human adaptation techniques? Asked Dean Zarian, the Academy's head administrator. I'd be honored, Jake replied, but I think it would be better to teach it alongside my classmates. They can show how human skills can work with alien abilities. An excellent idea, the Dean. Agreed. We'll create a new curriculum that combines human adaptability with alien specialization. Over the following weeks, Jake's life at the Academy transformed completely. The student who had once sat alone in the back of the classroom was now co-teaching courses to packed auditoriums. His human perspective was sought after for research projects and exploration missions. But the biggest change was in his relationships. With his classmates, Thyra no longer saw him as a primitive telepath. She saw him as someone who had learned to read minds through observation and intuition. Dex no longer saw him as physically weak. He saw him as someone who had learned to use strength efficiently and effectively. You know what's funny? Vex said one day as they sat together in the Academy's garden. We came to Earth to study your world's ecosystem. But what we really learned about was adaptation itself. And now we're better scientists because of it. Kex added, we don't just memorize facts anymore. We learn to observe, to adapt, to find solutions. That's what I've been trying to tell you, Jake said with a smile. Humans aren't special because we're strong or smart. We're special because we never stop learning. Neither do we anymore, Thyra said. You taught us that. Months later, Jake received an official offer that would have seemed impossible when he first arrived at the Academy. The Galactic Exploration Service wanted him to lead a team of alien specialists on missions to unknown worlds. Why me? Jake asked the recruiter. Because you're human, came the reply. In a galaxy full of specialists, we need someone who can adapt to anything. We need someone who can help our teams work together when everything goes wrong. Jake looked at the offer and thought about how far he had come. He had started as the weak outsider who didn't belong. Now he was being offered the chance to explore the galaxy precisely because he was human. "I accept," he said. "But I want to choose my own team." "Of course. Who do you have in mind?" Jake smiled. "I know some aliens who recently learned the value of adaptation. I think they'd be perfect for this kind of work." A few weeks later, Jake stood on the bridge of an exploration vessel, surrounded by his former classmates, who are now his teammates. They were heading into unknown space, toward worlds that had never been explored. "Are you ready for this?" Thera asked, her mental voice warm with friendship and excitement. "Are you?" Jake replied. "We learned from the best," Dex said. "We learned from a human." "You learned from Earth," Jake corrected. "I was just the translator." "Same thing," Vex said. "Humans are Earth's greatest creation, and Earth created something amazing." As their ship jumped to hyperspace, Jake felt a deep satisfaction. He had found his place in the galaxy, not by becoming more like the aliens around him, but by showing them what it meant to be human. He had proven that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest advantage is the ability to adapt to anything. Behind them, Earth continued its ancient dance of change and growth, creating new generations of humans who would carry the lessons of adaptation to the stars. And ahead of them lay infinite possibilities, waiting to be explored by a team that had learned the most important lesson of all in a galaxy full of specialists. The generalists would always find a way to thrive.